Now, after a bombing in downtown Nashville left more questions than answers, police have identified Anthony Quinn Warner, a 63-year-old man, as the culprit behind that explosion. Now, Warner died during the bombing and his remains were found at the scene. Now the question becomes, what were his motives? To discuss is a member of the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, Lieutenant Steve Rogers. Steve, what do you think happens here? I've heard all kinds of theories, all kinds of conspiracies, and as a professional like yourself, I'd like to know the thinking process you're going through right now.
Well, I certainly believe, based on the evidence that the law enforcement has collected, that it was not the intent of the bomber to take massive number of lives. That's pretty clear. He certainly did want to send a message to somebody. There is evidence that is pointing towards AT&T, perhaps because of his animosity, maybe at them because of the 5G networks. But saying all of that, what's going through my mind, and I'm sure through the mind of a lot of law enforcement practitioners, is the vulnerability of our communication systems around the country. I mean, this guy took out half a city, took out emergency networks, took out mobile phones. And that's pretty scary when you think about it. So that is what is going through my mind right now. With regard to a motive, well, we're going to have to wait and see where the evidence leads us.
Steve, take us through the process. So what the FBI is doing right now.
Well, what they're doing now is collecting physical evidence. Now, that means that they will be picking up bomb fragments. They will be looking at every nick and cranny of the crime scene, fingerprints, forensic analysis of not only what they found at the crime scene and perhaps beyond that, but also electronic footprints on his computer, on his iPad, if he had one, on his cell phone. In addition to that, there'll be perhaps hundreds of interviews with people who he associated with, who he worked with, who he knew, neighbors, friends. So they're going to gather a totality of information and then perhaps come up with at least a hypothesis as to why he did this, what the real motive was.
Yeah, and that is a separate story from something you were pointing out before, which is kind of seeing this happen and seeing it take out communications, because I used to live in Nashville. So I started getting all kinds of alerts that the 911 system was taken down. And we had friends living there. Their communication was very difficult at that point. So I guess when this happens, China, other bad actors may watch and see how we respond and learn from that. Is that something that concerns you?
Well, I've got to tell you, I'm a former member of the U.S. military intelligence and, as you said, FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. And on my mind, based on my experiences, exactly what you said. Not only were we watching these things unfold on TV, but so were our enemies. And look, the communist Chinese, they're here. There's no doubt about it. No doubt that they looked at our response, that they looked at now, which I think is very revealing, is the fact that we are very vulnerable. And where are the backup plans? Where are the backup stations, the backup electronics to the destruction of infrastructure like communications? So there are a lot of cities and a lot of politicians scratching their heads now saying, well, we better take a look at every single communication center around this country or we're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, Steve, so what can those cities and police departments do to prevent what happened in Nashville and happening in their city? What should they be doing?
Boy, is that a great question, and I have the answer. And look, I'm not going to make this political, all right, but it's a fact. We got to stop talking about defunding the police, but we have to fund the police. Why? Because we need to beef up our intelligence and information gathering sources. We need to beef up police officers on the street. They're the eyes, they're the ears of gathering information and intelligence. That is the first thing we need to do. And then set up public, private entity, private corporate partnerships in our communication systems. That's how you do it. But first and foremost, you got to give law enforcement the tools they need in order to gather intelligence and information. You could bet this, that the Chinese Communist Party have their intelligence agents here, no doubt about it. Well, we've got to match that and exceed it with funding our police.
Now, when you hear conspiracy theories, Because I've heard conspiracy theories connecting this to the election, connecting it to efforts to cover up what happened, that sort of thing. Now, I don't want to give credence to that. What I would like to know is, what do you look for to either shoot down or confirm those kinds of things? Where do you go for information? What kinds of things do you look for?
Well, I look for facts. Fact is, we know that this individual did not want to cause mass casualties. Fact is that this guy was able to build a massive explosive device, which leads me to the belief, just based on my opinion, I want to make that clear, that somebody else may have helped him build that bomb. And so we have to go down that road and make sure that there was no organization behind him, and that the intent truly was what the police are now being led to believe, perhaps a lone actor looking to send a message. So I looked at facts, and I try not to fill in those facts with any theories that take me away from the leads that I have. And you're right, there's a lot of theories out there. I don't believe this had anything to do with the election. I think it had everything to do with an individual who wanted to send a message. But for what reason? Well, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll find out soon. Lieutenant Steve Rogers, thank you so much for joining us and for your service, sir. Thank you. And
Always a
coming up,
pleasure.
we'll be